Hello everybody. Hope you enjoyed your holidays. If you watched my last video, I built a budget 1080p gaming PC for around $440, and that computer actually sold on Jawa for $620. So I'll list the profit right here in the video. And then we also built a budget 1440p 1080p gaming PC using my brother's old computer, and we sold that PC on my local marketplace for $630. So I'll list the profit here for that PC in the video as well. For this video, I'm going to be building another budget 1080p gaming PC. I was able to get a used CPU from my local marketplace. It's a Ryzen 5 2600X, and I got it for around 25 bucks because it had some bent pins, and I think I fixed them good enough. So the only thing we're waiting on now is the SSD and then also the case for this computer. The case is coming from AliExpress. I got a really good deal on it, but it's gonna take almost a month to get here. So by the time you watch this video, it'll probably be sometime in January. And then also the SSD was taking a very long time to be delivered as well because they were out of stock for the holidays, and it's just now barely being delivered. So that SSD will also get here in January. But in the meantime, I'm gonna start working on this computer with the parts that I do have and getting part of it built. And then once we get our case and SSD, we can finish the build, and we'll talk about the specs that I used for this computer. For this PC, as I mentioned before, I got a Ryzen 5 2600X off my local marketplace. I highly recommend this CPU for budget 1080p builds, as it's still a very capable 6-core processor, and you can find them relatively cheap on your local marketplace or eBay. For the motherboard, I used the MSI B450M-A Pro Max 2 Micro ATX motherboard. I got this motherboard for really cheap on AliExpress, and actually AliExpress has started to sell name brand motherboards for reasonable prices, so that's where I'm going to be buying my motherboards from now on. But I am curious to see once these tariffs go into effect if I'll still get good prices on these motherboards from China. For the memory, we're using a Silicon Power Gaming 16GB kit of DDR4 3200 MHz. This is a very cheap DDR4 kit of RAM that's very good for any budget build. It's the lowest price I can usually find on DDR4 RAM kits, and they do work with overclocking and the XMP profile, so this is my go-to for budget builds. Now for the SSD, as I mentioned before as well, I went with a Patriot P300 1TB SSD. Now, I don't recommend buying this SSD as it's usually always out of stock, and I had a situation with mine where I ordered it and it took 30 days for them to tell me that it would be delayed another week. And then after another week, they delayed the shipping again, so I was able to get a full refund for 2 SSDs that I ordered. And then they ended up still coming in the mail anyway, so I got these for free. But if you want an SSD that will actually show up in a timely manner, then I would recommend getting a Silicon Power 1TB SSD or even a Team Group SSD. For the graphics card, I got this Asus RTX 2060 6GB on my local marketplace. Now I know this graphics card is limited with the 6GB of VRAM, but I've noticed that the RTX series of cards sell much better, even though the GTX 1080 can probably outperform this card. It's just more appealing to buyers to have an RTX series card. And the RTX 2060 is still a very capable card, even with the 6GB of VRAM. It's also one of the cheapest RTX cards you can buy used for budget 1080p builds. For the case, I went with a Pato case that I bought off of AliExpress. It almost reminds me of a DIY PC ARGB Q1. The only difference is that it has a lot less room for cables in the back. Overall, it's a nice looking case, and even though it was a little difficult to work in, I think the aesthetic is really nice. For the power supply, I went with the Sigotep GN 650W 80+ gold. I've been using this power supply for my budget 1080p builds, and it gives plenty of wattage for upgradability in the future, and is overall a really good power supply for the price. Always find it for roughly $50 and sometimes on sale for cheaper, so I can always recommend this power supply for budget builds. For the CPU cooler, I went with a Darkrock PX4 CPU air cooler. It doesn't have any ARGB, but the all black look with it I think matches this black PC build pretty well, and it's one of the cheapest CPU coolers I can find that's a 120mm fan, for only around $16. Since this case didn't come with any included fans, I bought a 3-pack of ARGB fans from Thermalright. They're my go-to for fans since they sell the cheapest 3-pack. I also had to buy a fan splitter for this PC case, as well as an ARGB controller, and I also threw in a PSU cable extension kit, as well as a Wi-Fi adapter. I'll list the prices of all the parts that I used for this build. And as of recording, the total cost for this build was $372.31, and that's before tax. Even though this PC has older components, the performance was still really good. In Fortnite, we were reaching above 100 FPS. I would say that the average FPS that we were getting was roughly 150. I think this experience with this game was very playable. And with this PC, you can definitely play these competitive esports titles with no problem and get those high FPS numbers. So with this PC, you would have no problem running a game like Fortnite. Now in the finals, running 1080p, NVIDIA's DLSS, and medium settings with some ray tracing, we were actually getting some really good FPS. We were getting around 90 FPS and it felt really smooth, and I thought this was a really good experience. Visually, it looked really good too. So overall, I can't complain. I feel like this CPU and GPU combo still performed really well in this game, which actually surprised me. I was thinking that this game might be a little more challenging for this system, but it actually did very well. Now, playing Call of Duty Warzone is where we first ran into some issues with this computer. We started getting some extreme artifacting and some just insane visuals going on here. Stuttering, lagging, it was just all bad. But I realized the mistake I made was that I didn't let the shaders preload before I joined a match, and that just made the game unstable. So after I let the shaders preload, I started to get a more stable experience. In Call of Duty Warzone, I was running 1080p native on the balanced preset, and we were getting roughly 80 to 90 FPS, sometimes highs of 100. And I think visually it looked really good, and overall was a really good experience. I think this is really good for this system, seeing as that we were running at a native resolution with no upscaling or anything like that. It felt really good. And overall, I think the performance of this PC was really good in this game. So as you can see, this PC was a success. We got it built and the benchmarks looked pretty good. And I listed it on Java for $599. And before I could even finish this video, it sold for $599. So I'll list the profit here in the video. Recently, I've had a lot of success with my PC selling business, and I hope it continues to be this way. I know in my last video, I said I'd be building 2 PCs in this video, but we'll have to save that next PC for the next episode. So stay tuned for that. Until next time, this is Fish, and try not to get blown up.